Nobody saw her fall apart. Not really. They saw a pregnant woman standing beside a bus stop in the snow. They saw her one hand pressed against her belly, the other holding a thin plastic clinic bag. They saw the bus doors close in her face. They saw the taillights disappear down the street like nothing had happened. And then most of them looked away. That was the part Cedric Holloway would never understand about people. Not cruelty. Cruelty was easy to recognize. Cruelty had a face, a voice, a hand on your shoulder pushing you back. What frightened him more was silence. The kind of silence that sits in a bus full of people while a woman who is 7 months pregnant is left outside in 19-degree weather because she is 75 cents short. 75 cents. Less than the change people forget in cup holders. Less than the coins lying sticky under vending machines. Less than the price of a cheap candy bar. But that evening, on Route 63 southbound, 75 cents became a wall. And the strange thing was, nobody on that first bus knew what they had just started. They did not know that the woman standing in the snow was carrying more than a child. They did not know that the driver of the next bus had once been a little boy left freezing at a stop just like that. They did not know that one jacket, folded for 6 years on the seat beside him, was about to cost a man his job, change a clinic, save appointments, start a movement, and become the one object a little girl would one day be told about like a family legend. All they knew was this: the doors closed. The bus drove away, and one woman was left behind. Her name was Imani Rochelle Webb. She was 23 years old, 7 months pregnant, and far stronger than she looked standing under that gray Chicago sky. She had spent the whole morning at a prenatal appointment, listening carefully while the doctor explained that her baby was healthy. Strong heartbeat, good growth, everything on schedule. For the first time in weeks, Imani had walked out of the clinic feeling like maybe life was not only taking things from her, maybe something good was still coming. Maybe all the bus rides, the missed meals, the unpaid bills, the studying with swollen feet, the nights crying quietly so her mother would not hear, maybe all of it was leading somewhere worth reaching. That feeling lasted 11 minutes. Then her Ventricard beeped. Insufficient fare. The driver looked at the screen before he looked at her. His name was Gerald Pitts, though Imani did not know it then. He was 52, tired, and proud of being on time. He had been driving buses long enough to stop seeing passengers as people. Not because he was evil, because the job had trained him to watch clocks more than faces. "Miss, fare is $2, he said. Imani swallowed. She searched her pocket again, even though she already knew what was there. A quarter, 2 dimes, a lint-covered receipt, nothing else. "I'm 75 cents short," she said. "I just need to get home." The bus was half full. 18 passengers. A woman in the third row watched from behind her phone. She had seen everything. She had seen the belly, the clinic bag, the failed card, the coins in Imani's palm. She lowered her eyes to her screen as if the blue light could excuse her. A man in a gray coat sat by the window. 20 minutes earlier, when Imani had boarded another bus, he had given up his seat for her. A small kindness, easy, clean, the kind that makes a person feel decent without asking much of them. But now helping meant reaching into his pocket, speaking up, getting involved. He turned toward the window. Snow streaked across the glass. Her reflection stood there beside him, distorted and quiet. A mother with 2 children sat 3 rows back. She knew the feeling. She knew exactly what it meant to stand somewhere with not enough money and too much need. Her mouth opened. One word would have done it. "I'll pay." That was all. But the moment passed. Gerald pulled the lever. The doors opened. Cold air entered the bus like it had been waiting. Imani stepped down onto the curb. Nobody spoke. The doors closed. The bus pulled away. Gerald checked the clock. He was back on schedule. Imani stood at 55th and Halsted with snow collecting on her hair and shoulders. There was no shelter, no bench, no heated glass box, just a pole, a bus sign, and the wind cutting through her coat as if the fabric was only pretending to protect her. She did not cry. Crying requires a kind of safety, a little space, a little warmth, the belief that you can fall apart and still survive the next minute. Imani did not have that, so she stood still, one hand on her stomach, breathing carefully, because panic made the baby kick harder. Inside her plastic bag were the papers from her appointment. Good news, the kind she had wanted to take home and show her mother, the kind she had planned to fold neatly, put in her drawer, maybe one day show her daughter. Her daughter. The ultrasound in her wallet was from 8 weeks. It did not look like a baby yet, just a gray blur with a white dot circled by the technician. But Imani had kept it anyway. She had folded it so many times that a white crease ran through the center. To anyone else, it was barely an image. To her, it was proof. Proof that someone was there, proof that she was not alone, even when she was. The baby's father, Terrence, had disappeared slowly, not in one dramatic argument, not with a door slam. He had left in pieces, shorter calls, slower replies, missed plans, then silence. The ultrasound had confirmed it was a girl, and somehow that made him smaller. A man who could talk about dreams suddenly could not talk about diapers. A man who said he loved her suddenly could not answer a phone. Imani had stopped chasing him. Some absences explained themselves, so she carried her daughter alone to classes, to clinical rotations, to prenatal appointments across the city because the hospital 5 minutes from her house had closed. Roseland Community Hospital had once been where her mother worked as a nurse, where neighbors went when breathing got hard, or labor started early, or chest pain became too frightening to ignore. Then one day the doors closed, and the city called it economics. But for Imani's neighborhood, it was not economics. It was distance. It was 3 buses. It was missed appointments. It was mothers waiting in the cold with swollen ankles. It was being told to care for your health while every route to care became longer, more expensive, and less forgiving. Her mother, Denise Webb, understood that better than anyone. Denise had worked emergency rooms for 11 years. She had seen the difference between a patient arriving early and arriving too late. She knew that health was not only medicine. Sometimes health was a bus that came on time. Sometimes survival was a driver willing to wait 10 extra seconds. But Denise was not at the bus stop. Imani was. And the next bus was not due for 28 minutes. 3 blocks away, Cedric Darnell Holloway was driving south. He was not supposed to be there that afternoon. His shift had ended earlier. He had gone home, made a sandwich with the last slices of bread, and sat at his small kitchen table in Woodlawn, enjoying the rare quiet of a day that did not ask anything else from him. Then the depot called. Bad roads, driver shortage. Route 63 needed coverage. Cedric said yes. He almost always said yes. He had been that way since childhood, not eager, not foolish, just unable to hear that someone needed help and pretend he had not heard it. His mother, Lorraine Holloway, was the reason. Lorraine worked nights at a processing plant in East St. Louis for 19 years, 10 at night to 6 in the morning, sometimes 5 days a week, sometimes 6. She came home smelling faintly of industrial soap and cold metal, made breakfast for Cedric and his little sister, Nyla, slept a few hours, woke up, and did it again. She did not complain. Complaining required energy, and Lorraine spent hers on survival. But she had one sentence she repeated until it became part of the walls. You don't have to fix everything. You just have to not walk past. She said it when a neighbor got sick and she carried soup across the street before leaving for work. She said it when a new family moved in and she knocked on their door with advice about clinics, coat drives, and which bus actually showed up. She said it when Cedric came home upset about a boy being bullied at school. You do not have to fix everything. You just have to not walk past. Cedric learned manhood from the absence of a man. His father, Roland, left when Cedric was 4. No dramatic goodbye, no explanation. One winter, he simply stopped coming home, and by spring the closet where his coats had hung was just a closet. Cedric remembered the empty hangers more than the man. Lorraine filled that space not by pretending to be 2 parents, but by being fully herself. Tired hands, strong back, quiet rules, soup in the dark, front porch light on all night. And then there was the night Cedric never talked about. He was 7 years old. His tutor dropped him at a bus stop on Martin Luther King Drive at 4:15. The bus was supposed to come at 4:30. It did not. At 5 o'clock, it still had not come. At 5:12, snow began falling. Cedric knew the time because a clock on the bank across the street glowed through the storm. He watched it because there was nothing else to watch except cars passing with their windows up. He stood there with his backpack and thin jacket, hands in his pockets, waiting because he was 7, and waiting was the only plan he had. At 6:21, a rusty-colored sedan pulled over. A woman in a dark blue coat leaned across the passenger seat and opened the door. She did not ask why he was alone. She did not ask for proof. She did not turn his suffering into paperwork. She only said 3 words. You look cold. Cedric got in. She drove him home. He never learned her name. When he reached the house, Lorraine was already at the door, phone in her hand, fear frozen across her face. She had been home 11 minutes. She had called the tutor, the school, the bus line. She had already imagined every terrible thing a mother can imagine when the child who should be home is not home. She pulled him inside and held him so tightly he could feel her shaking. Then she said she was sorry. Again and again, Cedric told her it was okay. It was not okay. But he was 7, and when the person holding you is breaking, sometimes you lie to keep them together. Years later, people asked why Cedric always kept a navy blue CTA jacket folded beside the driver's seat. He never told them about the bus stop. He never told them about the woman in the blue coat. He never told them about being visible and ignored as headlights swept past him in the snow. He only said, "I like to be prepared." The jacket was one size too big because he had requested it that way, big enough to fit over someone else's clothes. It sat beside him for 6 years, every shift unused, not decoration. Not habit, more like a promise to a nameless woman, a promise to his mother, a promise to the 7-year-old boy waiting in the snow. So when Cedric saw Imani at 55th and Halstead, he saw more than a passenger. He saw a shape he recognized, the shape of someone abandoned in public, the shape of someone visible and ignored. His bus was not scheduled to stop there. He was 3 blocks away from the proper stop. CTA rules were clear. No passenger stops at undesignated locations. No fare override without authorization. No leaving the driver's seat during an active route. Cedric thought about the rules. He thought about his job. He thought about rent. He thought about the benefits, the pension, the rare stability he had built after years of warehouse shifts, delivery jobs, and work that disappeared whenever a manager decided it should. Then he looked again. Imani was standing still, snow on her shoulders, one hand on her stomach. Cedric pulled the lever. The doors opened. Cold air rushed in. He reached beside him and picked up the jacket. For a second, his hand stayed on the fabric. 6 years it had waited there. 6 years of shifts, storms, passengers, delays, complaints, route changes, and late nights. 6 years of never needing it until this exact moment. Then he stood. The passengers watched him step off the bus without a coat. Imani looked up when she heard his shoes on the wet curb. Her face was tired in a way that made her look older than 23. Not weak, just exhausted by being expected to survive too much with too little. Cedric did not ask her what happened. He did not ask for fare. He did not ask why she was there. He placed the jacket around her shoulders. It was too large. It swallowed her arms. It smelled like bus heat, clean vinyl, and a man who worked long hours in a small space. "The bus is warm," he said. "Come on." Imani blinked like she did not trust the sentence at first. Then she whispered, "Okay, thank you." Cedric walked beside her to the door. She climbed the steps slowly. He returned to the wheel, closed the doors, turned the heat to maximum, and drove. He was now 14 minutes behind schedule. For once, he did not look at the clock. The bus was quiet, not the ordinary city bus quiet where strangers pretend not to exist. This was different. This was the quiet of people who had just witnessed goodness and felt accused by it. A young woman in the second row stood up and moved to the back so Imani could sit closer to the heater. She did not announce it. She just moved. An old man in the 5th row watched Cedric through the mirror. He had ridden Route 63 for years. He knew Cedric by nods and timing. The driver who waited when someone ran. The driver who opened the door again if he saw a cane. The driver who never made kindness dramatic. The old man had never thought much about the folded jacket before. Now he could not stop looking at the empty seat beside Cedric. A mother with 2 children sat near the middle. She had transferred from Gerald's bus. She had seen the first door close. She had seen Imani step into the cold. She had said nothing. Now tears slid down her face. She did not wipe them. Wiping them would mean admitting they were there. Admitting they were there would mean admitting why. Imani sat in the front row, wrapped in the oversized jacket, both hands on her stomach. The baby kicked once, softer now. The heat touched her legs. Outside, Chicago moved past the glass. Laundromat lights, shuttered storefronts, a church sign still saying Merry Christmas in February because nobody had changed it. For 7 minutes, nobody spoke. Then Imani said, almost to the window, "Thank you." Cedric glanced at her in the mirror. "You don't have to thank me." She was quiet for a moment. "People keep saying that," she said, "but nobody does it." Cedric had no answer for that. Because she was right. People said help should not require thanks. People said kindness was normal. People said anyone would have done it. But buses kept moving. Doors kept closing. People kept looking out windows. A few stops later, Imani pulled the cord. She stood carefully and began removing the jacket. Cedric did not turn around. "Keep it," he said. She froze with one arm halfway out. "It's cold out there," he added. She looked at the back of his head, at his shoulders, at the empty place beside him where the jacket must have been sitting before her. She put her arm back in the sleeve. Then she stepped off the bus into the snow. The doors closed. The jacket went with her. Cedric drove on. 3 days later, he was called into the depot office. The supervisor, Mitchell, had a desk stacked with papers and a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Boss." He did not seem to understand the mug was a joke. Cedric saw the report before Mitchell spoke. Operator Holloway, Cedric D., Route 63, February 14th. 3 violations. Unscheduled stop at a non-designated location. Failure to collect fare. Exiting vehicle during active route. The report had been filed by Gerald Pitts. Cedric was not surprised. Gerald was not the kind of man who thought of himself as cruel. Men like Gerald rarely do. He believed in procedure. Procedure gave his life shape. Procedure told him where responsibility ended. Procedure meant nobody had to ask whether a rule had become smaller than the human being in front of it. Mitchell read the violations aloud. "Do you have anything to say?" Cedric sat straight, hands folded. "There was a pregnant woman standing in the snow," he said. "I stopped." Mitchell sighed. "That's not how the system works." Cedric looked at him. "I know how the system works. That's why I stopped." For a moment, Mitchell said nothing. Then he looked back down at the paper. The suspension became termination before the meeting ended. Cedric signed where they told him to sign. He turned in his badge. He walked out of the depot into February air without a jacket because his jacket was somewhere on the south side keeping a pregnant woman warm. At home, his apartment felt smaller than usual. The kitchen table, the unpaid gas bill. The calendar still stuck on January. The last 2 slices of bread gone. $340 in checking. Rent due in 14 days. Rent was $675. The math was simple. It always is when you do not have enough. That night, Cedric called Lorraine. She answered on the second ring, like she always did. Even though her children were grown, she still kept the phone close, as if motherhood had no final shift. He told her everything. The snow, the woman, the jacket, the report, the firing. Lorraine listened without interrupting. When he finished, the line stayed quiet. Then she asked, "Did you do what you were supposed to do, or what was right?" Cedric closed his eyes. "They weren't the same thing." "They never are, baby," Lorraine said softly. "They never are." After the call, Cedric sat alone in the kitchen. He did not feel heroic. Heroes in stories have music behind them. Cedric had a gas bill, an empty fridge, and no job. He did not regret stopping, but right choices still have consequences. And sometimes the world punishes you not because you did wrong, but because you reminded it what right looks like. Imani did not know any of this. She did not know that the driver who gave her his jacket had lost his job 3 days later. She did not know about the depot office, the report, the badge, the rent, the small apartment, or the phone call with Lorraine. She only knew that the jacket was warm, so she wore it every day. The sleeves hung past her wrists. The shoulders were too wide. The zipper would not close all the way over her growing belly, but she wore it to class, to the clinic, to the grocery store, to prenatal appointments. She moved the ultrasound into the left pocket without thinking, as if the safest thing she owned should live inside the warmest thing she had been given. Weeks passed. Her belly grew heavier. The city stayed cold, and the jacket stayed with her. On a Wednesday morning in early April, Imani woke at 4:15 with a pressure deep inside her body that did not negotiate. Denise drove her to the hospital in the dark. The labor room was too bright, hospital bright, beginning and ending bright. Imani held her mother's hand and made sounds she had never made before, sounds older than language. She had studied labor. She had trained for labor. She had planned one day to help other women through it. But knowing something and surviving it are different things. At 7:41 in the morning, her daughter arrived. 6 pounds 11 ounces. A girl. Imani named her Zora. Denise held the baby and stared at her for a long time. "She looks like she already knows things," she whispered. Imani laughed, exhausted and tearful. The jacket was folded on the chair beside the bed. She had worn it to the hospital and taken it off before changing into the gown. Now it sat there, navy blue and quiet, as if it had always belonged in rooms where people arrived safely. Imani looked from the jacket to Zora. For the first time, she wondered about the man who had given it to her. Not the moment, not the snow, not her own fear. Him, where had he gone after that night? Had he been cold? Had anyone asked why he had no jacket? Had he gotten in trouble? Did he have another one? Did he even remember her? She reached toward the chair and touched the sleeve. "I should find him," she said. Denise looked up. "Who?" Imani did not answer right away. The baby slept against her chest, warm and breathing. "The driver," she said finally. The man who stopped. What she did not know was that finding Cedric Holloway would take 4 months. And when she finally saw him again, he would not be behind the wheel of a bus. He would be standing outside a clinic, opening a car door for an old woman, doing the same thing he had always done, stopping where the world had learned to walk past. Cedric Holloway did not disappear all at once. That was the strange thing about losing a job. People imagined it as a clean fall. One day you are standing, the next day you are on the ground. But for Cedric, it felt more like slowly stepping backward into darkness. First came the termination paper, then came the silence after applications, then the empty mornings, then the way his phone stopped meaning possibility and started meaning bills. He applied everywhere: warehouse assistant, delivery driver, school custodian, night security, loading dock worker, grocery stocker, medical supply courier, anything that looked steady, anything with hours, anything with enough money to keep the apartment and enough dignity to keep his mother from worrying herself sick in East St. Louis. On every form, the question came: reason for leaving previous employment? He stared at that line longer than any other. Terminated. There was no soft way to write it. No space big enough to explain the difference between being fired for being careless and being fired for stopping for a pregnant woman in the snow. Online applications did not have a box for that. They did not ask whether the rule you broke had been smaller than the life in front of you. They just asked for the stain, so he typed it: terminated, and nobody called back. The first week, Cedric kept himself busy. He cleaned the apartment twice. He tightened the loose cabinet handle in the kitchen. He organized the mail into stacks he could not pay and stacks he could delay. He washed one load of laundry and stretched it across the radiator because using the dryer cost quarters he needed for food. The second week, he started waking before dawn for no reason. His body still believed he had a route. At 4:50 each morning, his eyes opened. He would lie still in the dark, listening for the alarm that no longer needed to ring. Outside, buses groaned down the avenue, their brakes sighing at corners. Every time he heard one, something in his chest tightened. Not jealousy, something worse. Purpose leaving without him. Driving Route 63 had never made him rich. It had never made him important, but it had given his days a shape. He knew who would be waiting where. He knew who needed a few extra seconds. He knew which older passengers hated sudden stops, which teenagers were pretending to be tougher than they were, which workers slept between shifts with their heads against the window because the bus was the only quiet they got all day. Now the route moved without him, and Cedric sat at a kitchen table with $340 turning into less. Lorraine sent $200 on March 1st. She did not ask if he needed it. She knew. Mothers like Lorraine did not need receipts to recognize trouble. They could hear it in a pause, in a shorter answer, in the way a grown son said, "I'm fine," too quickly. Cedric cashed the money and sat in the parking lot outside the store for nearly 10 minutes before starting the car. The shame came anyway, not because it made sense. Shame rarely cares about sense. He knew his mother wanted to help. He knew she would have been hurt if he refused. He knew she had carried more impossible math than this and survived it. Still, he was 34 years old, sitting in a car with his mother's money in his pocket because one decision had turned his life into a countdown. Rent, gas, electric, food. Each bill stood in line like it was waiting to take a piece of him. One Tuesday afternoon, while Cedric was filling out another application that would probably never be read by a human being, he heard a grinding sound from the alley below his apartment. It came once, stopped. Came again, uglier. Cedric stood and looked out the window. Otis Bell from the first floor was sitting behind the wheel of his 2003 Buick LeSabre, both hands on the steering wheel, face tilted toward the ceiling like prayer might fix the engine. Cedric watched for a moment. He could have stayed upstairs. He had his own problems. He had no job, no money, and no obligation to become the building mechanic just because someone else's car picked a bad day to die. Then Lorraine's sentence moved through him. You do not have to fix everything. You just have to not walk past. Cedric grabbed his toolbox. The toolbox had history. It had belonged to Roland, his father, the man who left. Lorraine had kept it all those years, not because she missed him, but because tools were useful and anger was not a reason to throw away something that still worked. When Cedric moved to Chicago, she packed the box and sent it with him. Your daddy didn't stay, she had said, but these will. Cedric used those tools now. He opened Otis's hood, listened, checked the belt, cleaned a corroded terminal, tightened what needed tightening, cursed softly when a bolt resisted, and got the Buick running in 40 minutes. Otis stood beside him, shaking his head. You always know what to do with broken things? Cedric wiped his hands on an old rag. No, he said. I just look until the broken part tells on itself. Otis laughed, but Cedric was not joking. That was how engines worked. That was how neighborhoods worked too, if anyone bothered to look long enough. By evening, Otis had told Mrs. Green in 2B. Mrs. Green told her cousin at church. Her cousin told a man with a van that would not start. The man with the van told his sister. And before March ended, Cedric had 3 cars a week coming through the alley. He did not charge much. Sometimes he accepted $20. Sometimes groceries. Sometimes nothing. If the person looked at the estimate and went quiet in that specific way people go quiet when they are trying not to cry over money. He was not building a business. He was just doing the next useful thing. But the cars brought stories. Mrs. Givens on 64th had missed dialysis twice because the bus came late and the clinic gave her slot away after 15 minutes. Tanya Coleman's mother could not pick up her blood pressure medicine because the pharmacy was 2 transfers away and her knees had gotten worse. A teenager named Devin missed a placement exam at Kennedy King College because the first bus never came and the second bus came too full to stop. Every person arrived with a car problem. Every conversation became a transportation problem. Cedric started noticing a pattern he had been driving through for 6 years without naming it. The city did not fail people in one big dramatic way. It failed them in gaps. A late bus here, a closed hospital there, a missing shelter, a fare short by 75 cents, a transfer that did not connect, a clinic that would not hold an appointment because its own schedule was choking too. Gaps. People did not fall because they were weak. They fell because every path had holes in it, and sooner or later the holes lined up. Cedric bought a small notebook from the Dollar Tree on Cottage Grove. Blue cover, thin pages, cheap wire spiral that bent too easily. On the first page, he wrote names. Mrs. Givens, dialysis Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30. Tanya's mother, pharmacy, Thursdays, noon. Devin, placement retake, Friday, 9 o'clock. Harold, VA hospital, every other Friday. Patrice Williams, asthma clinic for son, call first. He wrote addresses beside them, phone numbers, appointment times, notes about stairs, walkers, oxygen tanks, children, whether they liked the radio on or off. Then he started driving. At first he used his own car. Then Otis, who was 67 and tired of arguing with his Buick, handed him the keys one morning and said, "You keep it running better than I do. Might as well let it do some good." Cedric tried to refuse. Otis waved him off. "Don't make me beg you to accept a blessing. I'm too old for that." So the Buick became a quiet little lifeline. It was not pretty. Rust bloomed along the passenger door. The heater only worked when it felt respected. The radio lost signal under bridges. But the car moved and movement mattered. Cedric drove Mrs. Givens to dialysis on a cold Tuesday. She sat in the passenger seat with both hands wrapped around her purse, looking out the window. "My son used to take me," she said after 10 minutes. Then his hours changed. Cedric nodded. She did not say more. She did not need to. On Thursday, he drove Tanya's mother to the pharmacy. She tried to give him $6 in folded singles. He took 2 because refusing all of it would embarrass her. On Friday, he got Devin to his placement exam 20 minutes early. Devin sat in the car afterward and did not get out. Cedric looked over. "You nervous?" Devin shrugged. "Nah." Cedric waited. Devin stared at the building. Then he whispered, "What if I fail again?" Cedric turned off the engine. "Then you take it again. But you can't pass a test you don't walk into." Devin sat another 5 seconds, then opened the door. That night, Cedric went home with $12, half a tank of gas, and a feeling he had not had since the depot took his badge. Not safety, not yet, but shape. His days had a shape again. Meanwhile, Imani Webb's life had split into before Zora and after Zora. Before Zora, time had belonged to clocks, class schedules, clinic appointments, bus transfers, assignment deadlines, shift changes, due dates. After Zora, time became smaller and stranger. 2 hours of sleep, 20 minutes to eat, 7 minutes before the baby cried again. One hand free, sometimes none. The whole world shrank to feeding, changing, rocking, washing, whispering, surviving. And still, somehow it became larger too. Because Zora was here, not a white dot on paper anymore. Not a heartbeat through a monitor. Not a flutter under Imani's ribs. Here, breathing, warm. A whole person with tiny fists, serious eyes, and a cry that sounded personally offended by every inconvenience. Denise said Zora had an old soul. Imani said Zora had bills to pay and was already mad about it. They laughed more than Imani expected, even through exhaustion. Even when the apartment was messy. Even when her body hurt and her hair stayed tied up for 3 days because she could not remember the last time she had time to fix it. The CTA jacket hung on the back of her bedroom door. At first, she wore it constantly. Then spring softened the city a little, and she began carrying it instead. She washed it carefully once, afraid the smell would vanish completely. It did not. Some things remain in fabric no matter what water does. The ultrasound stayed in the left pocket, not because she needed it there anymore. Zora was proof enough now, but Imani had gotten used to knowing it was inside the jacket. The first proof carried by the first kindness. In May, Imani graduated. She almost did not go to the ceremony. The gown cost money. The shoes she had were tight. Zora had been fussy all night. and part of her felt too tired to celebrate something she had dragged herself toward inch by inch. Denise would not hear it. "You are walking that stage," she said, "even if I have to carry you across it myself." So Imani went. She wore the black gown, held Zora in pictures, and smiled with the kind of smile that comes from disbelief more than happiness. She had finished. Somehow, through pregnancy, heartbreak, bus rides, swollen feet, closed hospitals, unpaid bills, and nights studying with one hand on her belly, she had finished. A week later, she began clinical work at the Woodlawn Community Health Center. The clinic was not impressive from outside. Brick building, faded sign, a waiting room with chairs that had seen too many years, a front desk protected by scratched glass, a children's corner with mismatched toys and books missing pages. But inside, people were trying. That mattered to Imani. Hospitals felt like storms, bright, fast, loud, full of alarms and rushing shoes. Community clinics felt different, slower, heavier, more personal. Patients arrived carrying not only symptoms, but whole lives. Rent problems, food problems, childcare problems, work schedules, fear, shame, old disappointments. At the intake desk, Imani learned that the question, "Do you have transportation?" could decide more than any prescription. Some patients said yes when they meant maybe. Some said they would make it work when they meant they had no idea how. Some missed appointments and then apologized as if the city's failures were their personal weakness. That made Imani angry in a quiet, focused way. She recognized herself in them. She knew what it felt like to plan your health around a bus schedule that did not care whether your blood pressure was rising or your baby was coming or your son's inhaler was almost empty. One Thursday morning in June, Mrs. Givens called the clinic. "I'm coming, baby," she told Imani over the phone, breathing hard. "I got a ride today. Tell them don't give my slot away." Imani stepped outside to watch for her. The morning was cool, the kind of Chicago cool that makes people argue with themselves about whether they need a jacket. Imani wore scrubs, Zora against her chest in a cotton sling, sleeping with her mouth slightly open. A rusty Buick pulled up. The passenger door opened. A man stepped out from the driver's side and walked around the car. He opened Mrs. Givens' door and offered his arm. He did not rush her. He did not glance at his phone. He did not make patience look like a favor. He simply stood there, steady, while she adjusted her bag and placed her hand on his sleeve. Imani watched him. Something in her body recognized him before her mind did, not the face. She had barely seen his face in the snow. Not clearly, but the posture, the waiting. The way he opened a door like the person coming through it mattered more than the schedule behind him. Mrs. Givens walked toward the entrance. "Morning, Miss Imani," she said. "This the man I told you about. Gets folks where they got to go." The man turned. His eyes met Imani's. For a second, there was no recognition. Then his gaze dropped to the jacket folded over her arm. Navy blue, CTA, one size too large. Cedric Holloway stopped moving. Imani's breath caught. "You stopped the bus," she said. Cedric looked at the jacket, then at her, then at the baby sleeping against her chest. "You kept it," he said. "You told me to." They stood there in the clinic entrance with June air around them and 4 months of unanswered questions suddenly standing between them like another person. Imani touched Zora's back. "This is Zora." Cedric looked at the baby for a long time. His face changed, but not in a dramatic way. Something in him softened slowly, like ice beginning to loosen at the edge. Finally, he spoke. "She looks warm." The words were simple, but Imani felt them. She did not know why until later when Cedric told her about the woman in the blue coat. About the 3 words that had saved him when he was 7. "You look cold." Now here he was, looking at Zora, wrapped and safe and asleep. "She looks warm." The circle had closed, but neither of them fully understood it yet. Imani asked what happened after that night. Cedric looked toward the street. For a moment, she thought he would say nothing. Men like him often carried pain like groceries, quietly, one bag in each hand, refusing help until something tore. Then he told her. The depot, the report, Gerald Pitts, the 3 violations, the termination, the badge turned in, the apartment, the rent, the job applications, the notebook, the rides. Imani listened without interrupting. When he said he had been fired for stopping, her jaw tightened. "They fired you for helping me?" "They fired me for stopping where I wasn't supposed to stop." She looked at him. "You stopped exactly where you were supposed to stop. They just didn't have a sign there." Cedric looked at her then, really looked. For the first time in months, he felt understood not as a good man, not as a poor man, not as a fired man, but as a man who had seen a gap and stepped into it because no one else would. They sat on the bench outside the clinic while Mrs. Givens went inside. Zora woke once, made a tiny offended sound, then fell back asleep against Imani's chest. Cedric showed her the notebook. Imani read the names: Mrs. Givens, Patrice Williams, Harold Brooks, Tanya Coleman's mother. Her finger stopped. 3 of these are our patients, she said. Cedric nodded slowly. He had been driving them from one side of the problem. She had been receiving them from the other. Neither of them had known they were working on the same wound. Imani told him the clinic's missed appointment rate was terrible, not because people did not care, but because transportation kept failing them. She told him about pregnant women missing prenatal visits, diabetic patients stretching medication because the pharmacy was too far. Asthma checkups skipped until the emergency room became the only option. Blood pressure patients arriving weeks late and apologizing like shame could lower a number on a cuff. Cedric listened. Then he said, I thought I was just giving rides. You are, Imani said, but it's bigger than that. He looked down at the notebook. I don't know how to build bigger. You don't have to build it alone. Cedric did not answer. Nobody had ever said that to him in a way he believed. That night he called Lorraine. She answered on the first ring. He could hear the kitchen in the background, a spoon against a mug, the quiet hum of her old refrigerator, the familiar small sounds of home. He told her about Imani, about Zora, about the jacket, about the clinic, about the notebook matching the patients, about the possibility that this thing he had been doing in alleys and parking lots could become something real. Lorraine listened. Her tea went cold. When he finished, she said, You gave that jacket away in February, and it's still keeping somebody warm in June. Cedric smiled despite himself. Yes, ma'am. That's not a jacket, Lorraine said. That's a sermon. He laughed then, not loudly, just enough. After a pause, Cedric said, I keep thinking about that woman. What woman? The one in the blue coat. When I was 7. Lorraine went quiet. I never knew her name, he said. No, Lorraine replied softly. You didn't. I think about her every time I stop. I know you do. The line held both of them for a while. Then Lorraine said something Cedric would remember for the rest of his life. Your daddy left. That woman stopped. I stayed. And now you stop. That's the whole story, baby. Stop telling it to yourself like it's a question. Cedric closed his eyes. For years, he had carried his life like an unfinished equation. Father gone, mother working, stranger stopping, boy waiting, man driving, jacket folded. Now Lorraine had solved it in one breath. It was not a question. It was the answer. Over the next few weeks, Imani and Cedric began meeting after her clinic shifts. Sometimes in the waiting room after patients left, sometimes at her kitchen table with Zora asleep nearby, sometimes in Cedric's apartment where the table was covered with notebooks, clinic printouts, gas receipts, and takeout coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. They started with a simple idea. People needed rides to medical appointments. Cedric had drivers, or at least people willing to become drivers. Imani had patience, records, appointment patterns, and enough stubbornness to push through paperwork that made Cedric want to walk into traffic. At first, he resisted the formal language. Program, proposal, grant, Community Health Transportation Initiative. He trusted engines more than forms. Engines were honest. If something was broken, it made noise, leaked fluid, refused to start. Paperwork could hide its broken parts under words. Imani understood that, but she also understood something Cedric did not. The world respected paperwork more than kindness. A man giving rides could be ignored. A documented program with numbers, outcomes, liability coverage, volunteer procedures, and clinic partnership letters could get funding. So she taught herself. At night, after feeding Zora, after washing bottles, after putting laundry in a basket she did not have energy to fold, Imani researched community transportation models. She read about volunteer driver networks, non-emergency medical transportation, church shuttle programs, Medicaid ride gaps, clinic partnerships, insurance requirements, dispatch logs, mileage reimbursement. She learned the language. Then she translated Cedric's heart into a proposal the system could understand. Cedric recruited. Otis came first, then Mrs. Green's nephew, who had a minivan and afternoons free, then a retired postal worker named Althea, who said she knew every street on the south side and had no patience for people being stranded, then Jamal, a mechanic from a church on Cottage Grove, who offered to inspect donated cars for free. Each person had a reason: a mother who missed chemo because no one could take her, a brother who died waiting too long to get care, a neighbor who had been failed by buses, clinics, forms, and weather. Cedric wrote their names in the notebook. Imani typed them into spreadsheets. Together, they gave the thing a name: Route Home. Cedric was unsure at first. Sounds soft, he said. Imani looked at him over her laptop. Good. People are tired of hard. That ended the argument. The name stayed. Route home. Because every route should take you somewhere you need to be. The clinic director, Dr. Elaine Morris, was skeptical when Imani first brought the idea to her office. Not cruel, just tired. Dr. Morris had seen too many good ideas die under the weight of forms, funding, insurance, liability, and burnout. She had watched passionate people arrive with plans and leave 6 months later, exhausted by systems that smiled politely while doing nothing. "You're talking about transportation," Dr. Morris said, looking over the first draft. "I'm talking about missed care," Imani replied. Cedric sat beside her, hands folded. Dr. Morris glanced at him. "And you are?" Cedric opened his mouth, then paused. Former bus driver sounded like failure. Unemployed sounded worse. Before he could answer, Imani said, "He's the reason half these patients made it here last month." Dr. Morris looked back at the proposal. That got her attention. Numbers helped. Imani had collected them carefully. Missed appointments, repeat no-shows, patients who cited transportation, average bus travel time, appointment types affected, Cedric's informal ride list, patients served, rides completed, 0 missed drop-offs. The story mattered, but the numbers opened the door. Dr. Morris read quietly. Then she asked, "What do you need from us?" Imani did not hesitate. A room, a phone, a letter of support, help with insurance paperwork, and permission to prove this works. Dr. Morris leaned back. Cedric expected a no. Instead, she said, "There's a storage closet behind intake. It has broken chairs in it." Imani smiled. "We'll move them." The closet became their office. It was barely wide enough for a desk. The walls needed paint. The single overhead light flickered if someone closed the door too hard. But to Cedric, it looked like the beginning of something impossible. They found a used desk. Otis found 2 chairs. Althea donated a whiteboard. Jamal brought a phone from his church office that looked older than Zora's future memories, but still worked. On the first day they moved in, Imani brought the CTA jacket. Washed, pressed, folded. Cedric saw it in her arms and stopped at the doorway. "I figured it should be here," she said. He took it carefully. For a moment, he held it the way a person holds something returned from a long journey. Then he walked to the wall beside the whiteboard, where a small metal hook had been screwed in. He hung the jacket there. It no longer looked like his. It no longer looked like hers. It looked like it belonged to the room. Imani reached into the left pocket before letting it go. She took out the ultrasound photo. The old one, 8 weeks, white dot, creased through the middle. Cedric saw it but did not ask. She folded it once and placed it in her scrub pocket. "The jacket can belong to Route Home," she said. Then she touched the pocket over her chest. "This stays with me." Cedric nodded. Some things become symbols. Some things stay personal. Both matter. The first official Route Home schedule had 8 rides. Mrs. Givens to dialysis, Harold to the VA, Patrice and her son Malik to the asthma clinic, Tanya's mother to the pharmacy, 2 prenatal appointments, 1 diabetes follow-up, 1 physical therapy visit. Cedric wrote the routes on the whiteboard in black marker, his handwriting careful and square. Imani checked times against the clinic system. Althea complained that Cedric's route planning was too polite and needed to account for traffic, like Chicago is actually Chicago. Otis brought donuts and said every serious operation needed donuts. At 7:10 that morning, the first phone call came in. Mrs. Givens was ready. Cedric picked up the keys. Imani watched him from the doorway. "You nervous?" He looked at the jacket on the wall. "No," he said. Then he paused. "Yes." She smiled. "Good. Means it matters." Cedric drove the first Route Home car out of the clinic lot. Not a bus, not a city vehicle. No uniform, no badge, no fare box. Just an old car, a printed schedule, a thermos of coffee, and a promise finally big enough for more than one person to carry. By noon, 6 rides were complete. By 3, all 8, no missed appointments. No one left standing in the snow. That evening, Imani wrote the number on the whiteboard. Acht Achtel. Cedric stared at it longer than anyone expected. 8 rides did not sound like a revolution, but Cedric knew better. 1 person got dialysis. 1 child got his inhaler checked. 1 mother heard her baby's heartbeat. 1 veteran saw his doctor. 1 woman picked up medicine before the bottle ran empty. 8 rides meant 8 doors did not close. And sometimes that was how change began. Not with thunder, with a car arriving on time, with a driver waiting at the curb, with a jacket hanging on a hook, reminding everyone who entered that the work had started with 1 cold evening and 1 man refusing to drive past. By the end of the first month, Route Home had served 47 patients. The clinic's missed appointments dropped, not magically, not completely, but enough for Dr. Morris to call Cedric and Imani into her office with a printout in her hand and something like hope on her face. "This," she said, tapping the page, "is measurable." Cedric looked at the numbers. Imani looked at Cedric. Measurable meant fundable. Fundable meant sustainable. Sustainable meant the next pregnant woman might not have to depend on a stranger breaking rules to get home, but success did not erase the cost. At night, Cedric still worried about rent. Route Home had a small grant pending, but pending did not pay bills. He still fixed cars, still stretched food, still woke sometimes at 4:50, body waiting for a bus route he no longer had. And sometimes, when he passed a CTA bus, he felt the old ache, not because he wanted the job back exactly, because he missed the people. He missed the route. He missed being part of a city's movement, even a broken part. One afternoon, he saw Gerald Pitts driving Route 63. Cedric was stopped at a red light in the Buick. Gerald's bus pulled alongside. For a moment, the two men were parallel, separated by glass, traffic, and everything they had chosen. Gerald did not look over. Or maybe he did and pretended not to. The bus moved first. Cedric watched it go. There had been a time when that would have made him angry. Now it made him sad in a way anger could not reach. Gerald had not changed. Some people do not. Some people see the aftermath of what they refuse to do and still protect the refusal. They turn the page. They check the clock. They call it policy. They call it order. They call it not their problem. Cedric drove back to the clinic. The jacket was still on the hook. The whiteboard was full. The phone was ringing. And there was work to do. If this story is making you think about the people we pass every day without noticing, then don't leave quietly. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and write in the comments which country and which city you're watching from. I want to know where this story has reached, and I want to see how many people still believe that one small act can change the whole route of someone's life. By the third month, Route Home no longer felt like an experiment. It felt like a place people expected to find hope. The little storage closet behind intake had changed. At first it had been a desk, a phone, a whiteboard, two mismatched chairs, and a jacket on a hook. Now it had maps pinned to the wall, printed schedules clipped in rows, extra pens in a coffee mug, a second phone line, a donation jar, and a handwritten sign above the desk that Althea made after Cedric complained about people calling the office that ride closet. The sign said, "Route Home Dispatch." Under it, in smaller letters, someone had written, "Nobody gets left at the stop." Cedric pretended not to notice the line the first time he saw it. But he noticed. Every morning, he unlocked the clinic's side door before sunrise. He came in with coffee in one hand and the day's ride sheets in the other. He checked the cars, tires, oil, brakes, gas, wipers, heat, air, seatbelts. He checked them the way he used to check bus mirrors, not because anyone was watching, but because somebody's life might depend on the thing nobody else thought about. That was how Cedric moved through the world now. He had stopped thinking of help as a grand act. Help was not always dramatic. Sometimes help was making sure the passenger side door opened from the inside. Sometimes it was keeping an extra umbrella in the trunk. Sometimes it was remembering that Mrs. Givens hated sitting in the back because it made her nauseous. Sometimes it was knowing Harold did not like to talk before his VA appointments but always wanted to talk after. The work had details, and Cedric respected details. Imani saw it every day. She watched him turn kindness into procedure, which made her smile because that was the part the city never understood. Systems did not have to be cold. Rules did not have to be cruel. A schedule could be an act of love if it was built around people instead of built against them. She had changed too. Motherhood had sharpened her. Nursing had steadied her. Route Home had given her anger a direction. She was no longer only the woman who had been left in the snow. She was the woman standing at the clinic desk, looking at appointment lists, seeing the invisible danger before it arrived. A patient missing one prenatal visit was not just a missed visit. It could be blood pressure that went unchecked, a warning sign nobody caught, a mother told she was non-compliant when really the bus did not come. Imani hated that word, non-compliant. It was the kind of word systems used when they wanted suffering to sound like attitude. It made people who were already struggling sound careless. It turned distance into blame. It turned poverty into personality. So she started changing the language in the clinic notes. Could not attend due to transportation barrier. Patient requested ride support. Route Home scheduled follow-up transport. Small words, important words. Because once a problem had the right name, people could no longer pretend it was the patient's fault. One rainy afternoon, Dr. Morris called Imani and Cedric into her office. She had a folder on her desk, thicker than usual. Cedric sat quietly, already preparing himself for bad news because life had trained him not to trust thick folders. Dr. Morris looked at both of them. The grant came through. Imani froze. Cedric blinked. The whole thing? Not the whole thing, Dr. Morris said, but she was smiling. Enough for 1 year. Fuel reimbursement, insurance support, a part-time coordinator stipend, dispatch supplies, and maintenance. For a second, nobody moved. Then Imani covered her mouth. Cedric looked down at his hands. A stipend, not much, not rich, not even close, but official, real. Enough to pay rent without fixing 3 cars every weekend and pretending exhaustion was a personality trait. Dr. Morris slid the folder toward him. They want you listed as transportation coordinator. Cedric stared at the words. Transportation coordinator, Cedric Holloway. For months, he had been unemployed in every official sense. On paper, he had been a terminated bus driver trying to explain a stain no one wanted to understand. Now the same act that cost him one title had given him another. He did not know what to say. Imani did. He'll take it. Cedric looked at her. She lifted her eyebrows. You will take it. He almost laughed. Yes, he said quietly. I'll take it. That night, he called Lorraine. She answered, as always, like she had been expecting him. They're paying me now, he said. Lorraine did not shout. She did not perform surprise. She simply exhaled, and in that breath, Cedric heard all the prayers she had not admitted to making. Good, she said. About time somebody paid you for all that stopping. He smiled. It's not much. Enough? For now. Then it's much. Lorraine had a way of reducing the world to what mattered. Enough was much. Warm was rich. Arrived was saved. In October, she came to Chicago. Cedric told her not to take the bus. He offered to buy her a train ticket. She refused both. The Greyhound is $32, she said. I have survived worse than a bus seat. She arrived with one small bag, a container of pound cake wrapped in foil, and a look in her eyes that told Cedric she was going to inspect his whole life without asking permission. At his apartment, she checked the fridge. You eating? Yes, ma'am. She opened the freezer. Real food? Sometimes. She looked at him. He looked away first. Then he took her to the Woodlawn Clinic. Lorraine walked into the route home office slowly, not because she was weak, but because she was reading the room. The whiteboard full of names, the phone, the maps, the schedules, the donation jar, the jacket hanging on the hook. She stopped in front of it. Cedric stood behind her. That's it? She asked. Yes, ma'am. She reached out but did not touch it. For a long moment she only looked. Then she said, This thing been busier than most people. Cedric smiled. Imani came in carrying Zora on her hip. Zora was 6 months old then, serious-eyed and round-cheeked, wearing a yellow sweater Denise had found on clearance. She stared at Lorraine as if deciding whether this woman was worth trusting. Lorraine stared back. Well, Lorraine said, you look like you already know everybody's business. Zora blinked. Imani laughed. This is Lorraine, Cedric said. My mother. Imani's expression softened. She had heard enough about Lorraine to understand that this was not only an introduction, this was the root meeting the branch. Thank you, Imani said. Lorraine looked at her carefully. For what? For raising him to stop. Lorraine did not answer right away. Then she looked at Cedric. I raised him to know better. Stopping was his choice. It was the kind of sentence only Lorraine could say, a sentence that gave love without stealing responsibility. She held Zora for the first time that afternoon. Zora studied her face, then grabbed one of her earrings with surprising violence. Lorraine winced. She got strong hands. She gets that from her mother, Cedric said. And her grandmother, Imani added. Lorraine smiled at that. The room felt full, not crowded, full. As Root Home grew, people started telling the story in pieces. A former bus driver fired for helping a pregnant woman. A nurse who had once been that woman. A jacket, a baby, a clinic. Volunteer drivers, missed appointments dropping. Local news came first. A reporter with careful hair and uncomfortable shoes stood outside the clinic and asked Cedric how it felt to be a hero. Cedric hated the question. He looked past the camera for a second, toward the bus stop down the street where 2 people waited under a thin shelter that did not block enough wind. I'm not a hero, he said. I'm a driver. The reporter smiled like she thought he was being humble. He was not. He meant it. Drivers got people where they needed to go. That was the whole job. The news segment aired that evening. It showed Cedric opening a car door for Mrs. Givens, Imani holding Zora, the jacket hanging in the dispatch office, Dr. Morris talking about appointment rates, Althea complaining on camera that the city could find money for everything except getting old people to doctors. People liked that part. The segment was shared online. Donations came in. $20. 50. A church sent gas cards. A retired mechanic offered tools. A woman from the north side mailed 3 winter coats with a note that said, "For whoever needs one beside them." Cedric read that note twice, then folded it and placed it in the desk drawer. Gerald Pitts saw the segment in the break room at the CTA depot. The television was mounted high in the corner, volume low but captions on. Gerald stood by the vending machine with a cup of bad coffee while Cedric's face appeared on screen. Former CTA driver helps launch medical ride program. Gerald watched. He saw the jacket. He saw Imani. He saw the baby. He saw Cedric standing outside the clinic, calm and steady, talking about people missing care because they could not get there. Another driver beside Gerald whistled. "Isn't that Holloway?" Gerald shrugged. "Guess so." "You worked Route 63 with him, right?" The driver looked back at the screen. "Man, fired him for that?" Gerald's jaw tightened. He violated policy. The other driver said nothing. That was the trouble with policy. It could sound reasonable until someone put a baby on the screen. Gerald threw his coffee away unfinished. He did not call Cedric. He did not apologize. He did not sit with regret long enough for it to become change. Some people are not villains. They are worse in a quieter way. They are people who can see the proof and still protect the rule that failed. Gerald went back to work, but the story did not end with him. 2 years passed. Route Home expanded to 3 clinics on the south side. 6 cars, 14 volunteer drivers, a real dispatch system, a partnership with 2 churches and 1 community college, monthly reports, training sessions, insurance forms that still made Cedric curse under his breath, a waiting list longer than anyone wanted, a success rate that made funders return calls. Cedric became coordinator officially, but he still drove 3 days a week. He said it was because they were short on drivers. Imani knew better. He drove because the work had begun behind a wheel, because his hands still needed the road, because some part of him trusted service more when it had tire marks. The jacket stayed on the hook. Nobody wore it anymore unless there was an emergency. Once, in January, a teenage mother arrived at the clinic in a hoodie during a cold snap. Imani took the jacket down and placed it over the girl's shoulders while she waited for her ride home. The girl asked whose it was. Imani said, "Everybody's." That answer felt right. Zora grew into a serious 2-year-old who watched adults with the intense suspicion of a tiny judge. She spent weekdays in the daycare basement of a church on Cottage Grove. She liked blocks, applesauce, and pulling every book off a shelf before choosing one. She did not yet know the full story of the jacket, only that when she visited the clinic, Cedric lifted her high. Lorraine called her "little boss," and her mother touched the old navy sleeve sometimes when she thought nobody was looking. One day she would know. She would know that before she was born, her mother stood in the snow. She would know that one bus left. Another stopped. She would know that a man lost his job because he decided her mother was not a schedule problem. She would know that warmth can be inherited, not money, not land, not a family name carved into stone. Warmth. The kind passed from a woman in a blue coat to a little boy, from that boy to a pregnant stranger, from that stranger to a baby, from a baby to a clinic. From a clinic to a whole neighborhood learning that being on time matters less if the people who need you never arrive. On a Tuesday morning in October, Cedric drove Lorraine through the south side in one of the route home cars. She sat in the passenger seat, hands folded over her purse, watching the streets like she was memorizing the evidence of what her son had built. They passed the clinic, the church daycare, the pharmacy, the laundromat. Then they reached 55th and Halstead. Cedric slowed. Lorraine looked out the window. There was a shelter there now. Glass panels, a bench, a roof, not perfect, already scratched, already marked by weather and city dust, but real. 6 months earlier, the clinic patients had helped collect 400 signatures. Imani had written the petition. Cedric had brought it to community meetings. Althea had scared one alderman badly enough that he promised to look into it, which in Chicago meant nothing unless people kept showing up. So they kept showing up, and eventually the shelter came. Cedric pulled over across the street. For a while, neither he nor Lorraine spoke. "That where she was?" Lorraine asked. "Yes, ma'am." Lorraine looked at the shelter. "It wasn't there then?" "No, but it is now." "Yes." She nodded slowly. "That matters." Cedric watched a young man sit on the bench, hood pulled low, phone in hand. An older woman stood inside the glass away from the wind. A schoolgirl leaned against the side panel with a backpack almost bigger than she was. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the beauty of it. A shelter doing its job is not dramatic. A bus arriving is not dramatic. A patient getting to an appointment is not dramatic. Prevention rarely looks like a miracle because the disaster never gets to happen. Cedric was learning to love undramatic victories. The bus came. The doors opened. People got on. The doors closed. No one was left in the snow. Cedric drove on. That evening, Route Home held a small anniversary gathering at the clinic. Not a gala. No fancy lights. No rented hall. Just folding chairs, coffee, sandwiches, pound cake from Lorraine, and a sheet cake from the grocery store with blue icing that stained everyone's teeth. Patients came. Drivers came. Nurses came. Dr. Morris gave a short speech and got emotional halfway through, then pretended she had allergies. Otis told the Buick story 3 different times to 3 different groups. Althea argued with a city official about bus shelters while holding a paper plate of cake. Denise stood near Imani, holding Zora, watching her daughter with a pride so deep it did not need words. Cedric stayed near the back for most of it. He had never liked being the center of a room. Imani found him beside the dispatch office door. "You hiding?" "Strategic standing. That's hiding with better vocabulary." He smiled. Inside the little office, the jacket hung on the hook. The whiteboard was wiped clean for tomorrow. The phone was quiet for once. Imani stepped beside him. "Do you ever miss the bus?" Cedric looked at the jacket. "Sometimes." She nodded. "That makes sense. I miss the people more than the job." "That also makes sense." He was quiet. Then he said, "I used to think losing that job was the end of the story." Imani looked toward the crowded waiting room where Zora was trying to feed cake to Lorraine, and Lorraine was pretending to be offended. "It was," she said. Cedric turned to her. She smiled softly. "It was the end of one story, just not yours." He let that sit. Some sentences need room. A few minutes later, Dr. Morris called everyone's attention. Cedric immediately looked for an escape, but Imani touched his arm. "No," she said. "Stay." Dr. Morris stood near the front desk with a paper in her hand. 2 years ago, she began, a patient was left at a bus stop in dangerous weather. One person stopped. That one act became a ride, then a notebook, then a program, then a service that has now completed over 3,000 medical rides. People clapped. Cedric looked at the floor. Dr. Morris continued. 3,000 rides means 3,000 moments where someone did not have to choose between care and transportation. 3,000 moments where the door opened. The room grew quiet. Then Imani walked forward. She had not told Cedric she planned to speak. She stood beside Dr. Morris with Zora now on her hip. Zora wore a small blue ribbon in her hair and looked annoyed by applause in general. Imani looked at the room. "The night I met Cedric," she said, "I was not thinking about systems. I was not thinking about health equity or transportation barriers or missed appointment rates. I was cold. I was scared. I was embarrassed. And I was trying not to cry because sometimes crying feels like a luxury you cannot afford." Cedric swallowed. Imani continued. "A bus left me. People saw it happen. Nobody moved. Then another bus stopped. Cedric stepped out and gave me his jacket. At the time, I thought he had given me warmth. Later I found out he had given me much more than that. He gave up safety. He gave up a job. He gave up the life he had worked hard to build." She turned toward him. "And still, when I found him months later, he was helping someone else." The room turned with her. Cedric hated that, but he stayed. Imani's voice softened. "My daughter is warm because someone stopped. This clinic is different because someone stopped. Some of you are here because someone stopped. So tonight is not just about Cedric. It is about what happens when stopping becomes something we do together." Lorraine wiped her face once and pretended she was fixing her glasses. Zora clapped one time, late and serious, like she was approving the statement for public record. People laughed. Then Dr. Morris lifted a small framed photograph. It showed the Route Home office, the whiteboard, the phone, and the jacket hanging on the hook. Under the photo, a line was printed. "You do not have to fix everything. You just have to not walk past." Cedric stared at it. Lorraine's sentence. His mother's voice. The floor his life had been built on. He looked at Lorraine across the room. She nodded once. That was all. It was enough. Later, after everyone left, after the chairs were folded and crumbs wiped from tables, Cedric stood alone in the dispatch office. The clinic was quiet. Outside, traffic moved in the wet street. The jacket hung where it always did. He touched the sleeve. For years, he had kept it beside him because of a night when he was 7 and a woman in a blue coat stopped. He had thought the jacket was a promise to never forget the cold. But now he understood it differently. The jacket had never been about cold. It had been about doors, the ones that close, the ones that open, the ones you open for somebody else even when you are told you are not allowed. Cedric turned off the light and stepped into the hallway. Imani was waiting near the exit with Zora half asleep against her shoulder. "You ready?" she asked. Cedric nodded. Outside, the air was cold enough for breath to show. Not February cold, not dangerous, just enough to remind the body what season was coming. A bus passed at the corner. Its windows glowed. Its passengers sat in rows, some tired, some quiet, some staring into their phones, some carrying bags, some carrying worries nobody else could see. Cedric watched it stop at the shelter. The doors opened. A woman stepped on with a stroller. The driver waited while she lifted it carefully. A man near the front stood to help. Another passenger moved her bag. The woman got settled. The doors closed. The bus moved on. Cedric smiled. Not because the world was fixed. It was not. Not because every driver would stop. They would not. Not because no one would ever be left in the cold again. Someone would be. But somewhere, in one bus, on one corner, a door had stayed open a little longer than it had to. And that mattered. People like to believe change arrives loudly, with speeches, cameras, laws, headlines. They think the world shifts only when powerful people decide to move it. But sometimes the world changes because a tired man sees a pregnant woman in the snow and refuses to keep driving. Sometimes it changes because a mother's sentence survives in her son. Sometimes it changes because a stranger in a blue coat never gives her name but leaves behind a lesson stronger than memory. Sometimes it changes because one person pays the price for kindness, and instead of letting that price become bitterness, he turns it into a road. Cedric Holloway did not save the world. He saved one evening, then another, then another. And maybe that is all any of us can do. One evening, one person, one door, one jacket, one moment where we decide that being on time means nothing if we arrive without our humanity. Years later, when Zora was old enough to ask about the navy blue jacket in the framed photo, Imani told her the truth. She told her about the snow, the bus, the 75 cents, the people who looked away, the driver who did not. Zora listened with the serious face she had carried since infancy. Then she asked, "Was I cold?" Imani pulled her close. "No, baby," she said. "You were warm." Zora thought about that. Then she asked, "Because of him?" Imani looked at the photograph. Because of him. Because of Lorraine. Because of the woman in the blue coat. Because of everyone who carried the warmth forward instead of letting it die with them. "Yes," Imani said. "Because someone stopped. And that is the part of the story that stays. Not the firing. Not the report. Not Gerald Pitts and his policy. Not the unfairness, though that matters too. What stays is the choice, because all of us have been somewhere in this story. Some of us have been Imani, standing in the cold, praying someone will notice. Some of us have been Cedric, holding a rule in one hand and a human being in the other. Some of us have been Lorraine, teaching kindness without ever knowing how far the lesson will travel. And some of us, if we are honest, have been the passengers, watching, knowing, waiting for someone else to speak first. That is the uncomfortable part. The next time you see someone standing in their own kind of cold, you may not be able to fix everything. You may not have money, power, a title, a badge, or a perfect plan. But maybe you have a jacket. Maybe you have a voice. Maybe you have 10 seconds. Maybe you have just enough courage to not walk past. And sometimes that is where the whole story begins. If this story is making you think about the people we pass every day without noticing, then don't leave quietly. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and write in the comments which country and which city you're watching from. I want to know where this story has reached, and I want to see how many people still believe that one small act can change the whole route of someone's life.